Good morning, everyone. I'm Jean Finch, the Director of the Student Community Development Specialization in the School of Social Welfare, and I'm very pleased to welcome you this morning and to help host this 18th Annual Student Community Leadership Symposium. Dr. Schreiner, our panelists, Vice Provost Robbins is in the audience. Vice President Bajent will be joining us. I don't see him yet this morning. Dean Brisbane, faculty, students, colleagues, and guests. It's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Office of the Vice President for Student Affairs, the Office of the Provost, and the School of Social Welfare. It's my job to explain the work ahead this morning and to introduce our main speaker. I'll introduce you to her shortly, but let me briefly acknowledge her and the panelists now. Dr. Laurie Schreiner from Azusa, California. And in the front row, we have Dr. David Ferguson, and Amy Pomeroy is the student who will be on our panel, Eugene Cancam, and Sarah Afsfall, Dean Stein, and Dallas Bowman will be moderating the second half of our work together. So there are many people to acknowledge in the process of planning a symposium such as this. And Dr. Schreiner's lecture is included as part of the Provost lecture series, and the Provost's office has been instrumental in advertising and in supporting this event. And I said Vice Provost Robbins is with us this morning, and we're very pleased to have you with us. As usual, the Student Community Development Advisory Board has been a valuable resource in formulating and planning this morning. Judy Siegel, Betty Jean Race, Nikki Barnett, Richard Morgan, Iris Feinberg, Jerry Stein, and Dallas Bowman. This year's event is part of the Student Affairs Professional Development Series, and Sue DeMonda has been attending to many of the details of today's event. Whenever I'm confused as to who I need to speak to or what I need to do, I have a quick call in to Sue. The current SED students are here with us this morning. They have name tags and been handing out the brochures and the programs. And if any of you have any questions, just seek them out. And they're standing in the back of the room, but they are here to be helpful to make sure that your morning with us is comfortable. But it's the ongoing support of the Office of the Vice President for Student Affairs as over the past 18 years that has sustained this effort. Likewise, Dean Brisbane has supported my involvement in this rewarding endeavor, and on behalf of everyone here, we thank you. Please accept Peter. You just saw Peter walk in, but both Dean Brisbane and Vice President Bajent, thank you very much for your support. Everyone here, help me, yes. And thanking everyone that's been involved in making today possible. So I'd like to just provide some information about the framework of our work together. You'll see in the brochures that we have a schedule of speakers with us for the morning. In the first hour, we'll be engaged in hearing from Dr. Schreiner, who will take questions following her talk from the audience before we proceed on. Then our panelists will join the stage, and Dean Stein will speak first, addressing comments from the aspect of thriving in the community. And Dr. Ferguson will then follow, addressing comments from thriving in the classroom. We will then have our three students from Stony Brook University share their own thoughts and experiences about today's topic. And then once all of those respondents have spoken, they will engage with each other in terms of the comments that are sparked and their own thoughts about the topic, and then we will open up for audience discussion. And Dallas, as I said, will be moderating that segment of the morning. So the Leadership Symposium has been part of the Student Community Development Specialization since it started. And one of the goals of this event is to engage in discussion regarding issues in leadership on college campuses and to foster meaningful dialogue within our learning community. The topics addressed during the past 18 years have ranged over a number of relevant issues surrounding the challenges of leadership in higher ed, and they exemplify the values of the special collaboration between the School of Social Work and Student Affairs on this campus. This partnership is an innovative academic venture between the School of Social Welfare and the Office of the Vice President for Student Affairs. It combines and extends principles of social work and student affairs practice to prepare MSW students to focus on the essential elements of community building in higher education. The collaboration involves co-teaching, sharing resources, and finding mutual purpose. What brings us together is our shared vision of campus community as a vehicle for enhancing social justice and civic responsibility, and our commitment to promote student development and student success. Today's symposium is a vibrant example of these shared concerns. This year's focus, Thriving, a New Vision for Student Success, builds upon previous symposiums and the university's commitment to improve the student experience supporting student success. Dr. Schreiner's series of 3 articles in About Campus in 2010, The Thriving Quotient, Thriving in the Classroom, and Thriving in Community, addresses the question, what does knowing a student's level of thriving add to our understanding of the variation of success beyond traditional predictors? In answering this question, Dr. Schreiner reports that after controlling for key variables, a striking additional 8 to 18% of the variation was explained by her thriving variable in such outcomes as grades, intent to graduate, self-reported learning gains, and institutional fit. This is a striking finding and deserves our time this morning. Stony Brook has been working to improve efforts to support student success, and for this we have much to be proud. The focus today recognizes our need to sustain these efforts and to understand ways to improve our outcomes. A focus on thriving in college has the potential to change the way we view student success and to shape the strategies we use to assist students. It shifts our attention from failure prevention to success promotion. Our speaker and respondents have just demonstrated their commitment supporting and enhancing a cohesive learning experience both inside and outside the classroom, and to supporting and enhancing a sense of place and community towards that end. The 3 students with us today have managed to find paths towards achievement of their goals. Their stories are similar, but also represent how success is explained when characterized by stories of individual students. 2 were convinced during their first semester that they would transfer from Stony Brook. When you learn of their contributions to our community, you will see what we might have lost if that had happened. Another describes consciously deciding to approach the challenge of university by becoming involved and to take advantage of what the university experience might have to offer. Opportunities presented themselves that made it impossible to ignore, quote unquote, but we know that it might have been very different. Together, our speaker and our respondents provide a varying perspective on this important topic. We're all eager to get started, and Dallas will introduce the respondents and the panelists when they come to the stage, but let me now introduce Dr. Schreiner. Dr. Laurie Schreiner is professor and chair at the Department of Doctoral Higher Education at Azusa Pacific University. It was warm when she left last, yes. She is also co-director of the Comprehensive Assessment Project and senior fellow at the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities in Washington, D.C. She is also a senior research associate for the Gallup organization, who presented her with the Greatest Contribution to Strength's Vision Award in 2004. Dr. Schreiner was project director for 2 federal grants from the Fund for the Improvement of Post-Secondary Education through the U.S. Department of Education. The first centered on successful programming for first-year college students, and the second on the development of a 4-year strengths education program. Her publications focus on issues related to improving student success. For example, helping sophomores succeed, understanding and improving the second-year experience, linking student satisfaction in the assessment of institutional effectiveness, the Engaged Learning Index, the critical role of faculty and faculty development in sophomore success, and the contribution of student satisfaction to persistence. She's also co-author with Clifton and Anderson of the popular Strengths Quest, Discover and Develop Your Strengths in Academics, Career, and Beyond. Dr. Schreiner is a frequent presenter on these issues and has been recognized by Azusa Pacific University for graduate scholarly achievement. Her record of achievement and focus on understanding of student success is exemplary. We're indeed fortunate to have her join us from California. Please help me in welcoming her to the podium.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here for spring in New York. The shift was a little bit of a shock last night as I got off the plane and realized, I wasn't expecting it to be quite this cold, but thank you for your warm welcome that makes up for the cooler weather. So it really is my pleasure to be here and to be able to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart for the 30 years that I've been a faculty member in higher education. And let's get one thing clear at the beginning, I started when I was 10. Okay, just saying. So student success is something that I have studied for all the years that I've been in higher education, and I've seen us shift our focus, and yet our results are not really changing. If you look at the last 3 decades in higher education, you don't see a lot of change. And so I think we're ready for a paradigm shift. I think we're ready to shift into a different gear and to look at student success perhaps through a new lens. So thank you for inviting me to share in the conversation with you about this. But I want you to begin the conversation. I want you to think for a minute about your campus and how you would define a successful student here. Think about that for a minute, and then what I'm going to do is give you 60 seconds to share with your neighbor, that's 30 seconds each, I'm going to time you, on how you would describe that student, a successful student on this campus. Go.
And you've got water?
Thank you. All right, I'm going to call time. And I'd love to hear what you thought, but what I'm going to ask you to do is, what did your partner tell you? What did you hear? How do you define success?
Involved, good GPA.
Okay, involved and GPA. Heard those 2 things. Okay, what else did you hear?
Well-rounded.
Well-rounded. What does that mean?
A student who's, like they said, that is in Northland campus community, interested towards their degree progress, academic pursuits, things like that.
Okay, so they've got it all together. Huh? All right, all right. I heard somebody else shout out over here. Yeah?
Growing academically and also taking care of their health.
Okay.
And physically.
Okay, so they're growing academically, but also taking care of their mental and physical health. Okay. Anything else you would add? Yes?
A student that feels connected to and proud of their institution.
All right, they're connected to this place and proud of it, proud to be here. Yeah? Okay, they're retaining what they're learning, and I guess we should assume they are learning something. Yeah, okay. They graduate, okay. That's a very common indicator of success, certainly. Anything else you would add to that? Well, you have hit most of the ways that we think about success. And oftentimes we think about it in terms of grades and grads, right? What's your GPA? Are you crossing the stage at graduation? And institutionally, we want to know what are our timely graduation rates. Are our students graduating on time? And that's so often how we limit, I think, the vision of success to those two things. But as a faculty member, I've watched a lot of students cross the stage over the years, and many of them with great GPAs. And yet, qualitatively, they are very different from one another. Just because they've crossed the stage with a good GPA, they may not have made the most of their college experience. They may not have been fully involved. They may not have been healthy physically and mentally, but they were able to survive. And I thought there's got to be more to this than just surviving to walk across the stage. Now, certainly our accreditors care about those learning gains, and I think we all do care about that as well. And certainly with the National Survey of Student Engagement, our focus is shifting now to some of the behaviors that students engage in that help that learning process. And that's how we have tended to define success. And so as a result, we approach it pretty much behaviorally. If I can see it and measure it and count it, that's a lot easier. And so we focus on those behaviors that lead to the learning outcomes. And so I might look around the room and I say, well, how many people are sitting on the front row? That indicates engagement, doesn't it? Well, I think something's missing there because actually you were asked to sit in those seats. Nobody's sitting over there. And sometimes it's the last person in the room who ends up at the front because everyone is going for the coveted seats in the back. And so behaviors, I think, are missing something. They are not always indicative of what's going on psychologically. But the way we tend to measure things in higher education is I have to be able to see it and count it. So I look at the behaviors, I measure the institutional supports for these engaged behaviors. Sometimes I define success or I approach success through the programs and services. Did we offer certain programs? Did we offer or provide certain services? Look how great that is, and students liked it, or X number of students showed up. And the researchers in higher education do these elaborate regression equations and pretty much have determined that the inputs matter as much as the environment, and that is that these demographics are often predictive of student success, and that maybe that's why things haven't changed in decades, is because of the challenge of the students who are coming into higher education, particularly low income and those who've been historically underrepresented in higher education. And so we shake our heads and say, well, there's not much we can do. Well, I think there is. Because I think what has been overlooked until recently is what's behind the behavior. What's going on psychologically that leads that student to engage in the kinds of things that are going to promote his or her learning and lead him or her to become involved on campus and feeling proud of the university. So I wanted to know what's behind the scene. What's behind those behaviors that lead to engagement? What are the attitudes, the motivation, those psychosocial factors? Now that's probably because my own PhD's in psychology. And so I bring that lens into higher education to say, what's going on inside students' heads and faculty heads and administrator heads that lead them to engage in particular behaviors? And that led me to think more about what student success really is all about. And so with my doctoral students over the last couple of years, we've been studying this and have a new book that came out this last summer on thriving in transitions, that has looked at the research base for these psychosocial factors and how predictive they are of success at transition points throughout the university, because that's when things tend to take a nosedive, is when you're encountering an unfamiliar situation, a new situation. And so we've looked particularly at those transition points for students to say, what can we do or what helps them really thrive during those difficult times in the college years? Now, the background on this comes from positive psychology. If you're not familiar with that, it is a movement that really started in 2000 when Marty Seligman was president of the American Psychological Association, and he stood up in front of thousands. I think there were 5,000 people in the room at the time. I was one of them, and he looked out over the room and he said, you know, we've not been doing this right. Psychology is half-baked. And we all went, yeah, we know this. And he said, we've been focusing on dysfunction. We've been focusing on disorder. We have this whole diagnostic and statistical manual for mental health disorders, and we haven't focused on what's going right with people. We haven't focused on what helps people have healthy marriages and good schools and positive, thriving communities. And that really led to a very scientific study of what's going right, what leads to a well-lived life. And so positive psychology focuses on what's going on inside the individual, but also what happens in the community around that person. And that's really the basis that led into the work that we've been doing on thriving. Corey Keyes and John Haidt have done work on flourishing with adults, in which they define this as a flourishing adult, and their studies have been conducted on people who are in midlife and older. And they said people who are flourishing, who look back on life and say, you know, I've really done well, are people who are resilient, who really step up to the challenge, but they're involved in healthy relationships. They love their work, they love the people around them, but it's not just about them. It's about looking beyond themselves to the greater good of other people. And this really intrigued me as I read their work when it came out in 2003. And I thought, I wonder how that works for college students and if that same piece would be true for them. Marty Seligman also has really put all of his work together on flourishing to say, these are the 5 things that really lead to a feeling that I've lived my life well. I've been engaged in something productive and meaningful. I've accomplished some things. I have experienced joy. You know, there's positive emotions in my life. I've had positive relationships, and there's been some meaning and purpose to it. So this is a little bit of the background that led us to think about what this might look like on a college campus. Now, John Bean and Sean Eaton in higher education, so really the work that we've been doing is that intersection of psychology and higher education. To say, how do we inform each other? How do we speak into the work of each other? And certainly with John Bean's work on student persistence, he has taken more of this psychological model. He said, let's look behind the behavior that leads a student to come back the following year and to say, what were the attitudes that preceded that? And what he found is that students whose coping is to take the initiative, to approach something rather than to disengage and avoid it. Students who feel like they can do things well and that they have some control over what they do are those who are most likely to stay. So we incorporated his work as well into our thoughts about thriving. For me, this is a shift in perspective because I think higher education has been very much about survival. It's been about what's the minimum threshold, what's the bare bones, what's the least that we need to do to help our students. And when you focus on survival, then I think you're looking at the lowest common denominator, and you're no longer thinking about excellence. You're no longer thinking about how do we get the most out of the opportunities that we provide our students. And so it's a paradigm shift, I think, for us to move from survival into thriving, because it also shifts us into things that are changeable about a person, which I'll get to in a moment. Higher education has been very much about what you bring and the experiences you've had before you got here. And sometimes you've been doomed by your demographics. Sometimes we say, oh, low-income family, not such a great high school, not good academic preparation, historically underrepresented, chances are not good. And I'm tired of that kind of approach that higher education has taken. I know of no other profession that would be proud of a success rate in higher ed that right now we have maybe half of students across all of higher ed. I know that Stony Brook does significantly better than this, but across all of higher ed, a student basically has a 50-50 chance of getting a college degree. Now, what surgeon would be proud of that rate? What other profession would say, that's good with me, 50-50 chance, that's okay. So I think we're needing to shift into a different gear here. Instead of focusing on who our students are when they walk in the door, where they've been, the things I can't change about them, which would be their family situation and their family income and the kind of high school preparation they've had, instead of focusing on all the ways in which they are not ready for college yet, instead of being in this failure prevention mode, I want to shift the paradigm into the things that can be changed about a person, to where they are going and who they can become, the talents they bring when they walk in the door, and how to build on those. And I want to be in the success promotion business rather than the failure prevention business. It's a whole different ballgame when you think in terms of how do I promote student success instead of how do I prevent student failure. So why thriving? Why use that word? Well, we were looking at more than psychological well-being because the academic success is certainly a big part of it. I like the word because it can be contrasted to surviving, and it's an active word that implies this vital engagement, this optimal kind of functioning. Now, when we first thought about it, we thought about it in these three terms of having these academic and psychological and social components. And so we started looking in the literature for things that other researchers had already been able to measure and had already connected to some element of student success, either to retention or graduation or GPA, learning gains, etc. But here's the key element. We looked for things that were malleable. So everything about thriving can be changed in a person. You can learn to do every single thing that comprises thriving. And in that way, interventions make a difference. And for me, that's what's exciting about it, because it's no longer something I can't do anything about or have no control over. It's something that's very teachable to a student, to say every single student could thrive under the right conditions. So the thriving quotient took us a couple of years to come up with, because we looked at these existing malleable constructs that were already out there, and then there were 198 items that we started with, and we did student focus groups and asked them how each of the items were coming across and being interpreted by them. We put them through lots of rigorous testing and got them down to 18, believe it or not, that have a strong reliability and validity. So they're very predictive of other student success outcomes that matter in higher education. They're strongly consistent, and we just finished a confirmatory factor analysis, so that thriving really is a 5-factor model. And so it has these 5 elements to it that really go back to the original 3. So the academic thriving is the engaged learning and academic determination. The social kind of interpersonal thriving is the diverse citizenship and social connectedness. And then the psychological thriving is this positive perspective. And thriving is a higher order construct. So if you think about it like vegetable soup, okay, the vegetables in there are the individual factors, but vegetable soup is more than just a collection of vegetables. There's something that happens when you put them all together and make soup, and that's kind of what thriving is like. The thriving is something more than just adding up all the parts. It is something where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, but the parts are still very important. So in terms of each of these factors, let me explain and maybe give you an example of each one. So academic determination really is this ability to monitor your own learning and to be very goal-directed. So you think, I've got a goal out there of what I want to do, the kind of person I want to be. I have some pathways for getting there, and I can manage my time and my resources and my effort. I invest the effort to get there, and I know how my own strengths and talents can help me reach my goals. So that's academic determination, and it's strongly, obviously, connected, predictive of GPA. But engaged learning is also an important part of thriving, and I put the iceberg image up there because engaged learning is like an iceberg. If you were to ask faculty how they know students are engaged, what would they say? Shout it out here.
They ask questions.
They ask questions. How? They're in class, yes. That's good. Eyes are open. Anything else?
They're not on their iPad.
They're not on their iPad, okay?
Good grades.
They're getting good grades, okay? But so often, the way I define engagement is by what I see, right? And so that's the tip of the iceberg, that active participation. Are they involved? Are they asking questions? I'm looking at the behaviors, right? Well, what we see is that those behaviors are actually less than 10% of the engagement in learning. They're the obvious part, and they are the part where there are gender differences and racial differences. If it's all I look at, if it's all I think about when I'm determining engaged learning, I am missing the boat, and I am likely to make judgments about a student based on their gender or based on their culture that are simply not true of what's going on behind the scenes. So underneath the surface, there is this focused attention, this mindfulness. Am I alert to what's happening around me? Am I noticing differences? Am I taking different perspectives? And there are no gender or racial differences in that. And then way underneath the surface is this deep learning, this meaningful processing that's making these connections between, oh, I learned this in this other class, and that connects to what I'm doing here, and I'm interested in this, or I have some goals for this, and so I'm going to connect it to that. It's the connected tissue, that meaningful processing that being engaged is really all about, and there are not gender or racial or cultural differences in that either. So if we're giving participation grades based on what we see, we may be missing a large part of what's happening in the classroom. And so engaged learning is getting at what is underneath the surface, this deep learning or meaningful processing. Then the interpersonal thriving has two components to it. This social connectedness, this ability to make friends and to have friends who can support you when times are difficult. But it also has as a component what we call diverse citizenship, which is kind of the ABCs of making a difference in the world. The A is for the attitude. Do I want to make a difference? Does that matter to me? Is that something that's important to me? The behavior is, am I actually spending time making a difference in the community around me? And the cognition is, do I believe I can make a difference? So that's that kind of feeling of control and self-efficacy about making a difference and appreciating the role that I have to play in the community. And as many students said to us when we interviewed them about what it's like to thrive in college, in every instance they said, it is not just about me. Every student who said that they were high thriving, and we spent a long time interviewing them, said, it's not about me. It's about the relationships in my life, and it's about what I am giving back, and it's about how I'm involved in the community around me. And then the psychological thriving is this positive perspective. It really comes down to, and I think this is the foundation for thriving, it's how do you see the world? Is the glass half full or half empty for you? And this is something that while you may have a predisposition to be optimistic or pessimistic, you can learn an optimistic explanatory style. You can learn that when bad things happen to you, you can say, you know what? You have a choice here. When something bad happens to you, you can either, I'm such a loser, I can't ever do anything right, this always happens to me, I just don't have a math brain, I probably shouldn't ever take another math class again. Or you can say, you know what, I must not have used the right study strategies. I must not have spent enough time on this. I'm going to think of a new way to do this next time. So the students who have this positive perspective and are then thriving are those who see failure not really as failure, but as a temporary setback that is under their control. And I will tell you what, when you see the world that way, everything changes. Everything changes. When you see life around you as under somewhat of your control, that there are things I can do differently next time, and that this doesn't mean that I'm a loser forever, okay? Now, what's fascinating about this is Raymond Perry and his colleagues have found that faculty using the best strategies they know, so we take the best faculty, we equip them with the best strategies, teaching strategies, it has no effect on low-achieving students in the classroom. None, unless we address this issue of their perspective. And in terms of how the researchers look at this, they talk about it as attributional retraining, okay? Until we can help students see the ways they can be in control of their academic life and what they can do differently when things don't work out the way they had thought they should, until we address that, the best faculty using the best strategies are not going to have an impact on the students who are struggling the most. And so that's been very convicting for me as I think about what I do in the classroom and how the first day sets the tone for that. That my job has to be to teach students the strategies for success in my discipline. Here's what it takes. Why is that a secret? Why do we act like that's a secret? Okay, that you've got to figure it out, that'll be really my indication that you are successful is when you figure out how to make it work. No, it's my job to say, here's the ways that you can be successful in this particular course and in this discipline as a whole. Now, we also put on the Thriving Quotient because it's an online instrument. We put some additional scales and items on there, so we ask students about how it feels to be on their campus. Are they proud of their university? Do they feel like they belong? We ask them about their interactions with faculty. We ask them about their satisfaction with a lot of different campus experiences and how involved they are in various campus experiences. We also ask them about their spirituality based on the work that's coming out of UCLA these days with Sandy and Lena Aston and Jennifer Lindholm on the role that spirituality plays in student success. So we've asked them some questions about that. And then we have asked their demographics as well so that we can do the regression equations like everyone else and see how this all plays out. What we've concluded is that this thriving piece is so malleable. We can intervene to make a difference in students thriving and in their ultimate success. And that is what is exciting to me about it, is that we can make a difference in students' success. So what predicts thriving? Well, these are the 4 elements that we found were most predictive, and I'm going to address the first one last because I think it's the most important. It was the one that was the big ticket item in our work. But sense of community on campus, high-quality faculty interaction, campus involvement, especially if you're in the majority on campus, and I will come back to that issue, and spirituality, especially if you're not in the majority. Our research was on predominantly white campuses. So we studied 92 institutions across the US, about 30,000 students, but they were all predominantly white institutions. What we found is that there were different pathways to thriving among students of color. And so in some ways that is good news. I mean, it has some good and bad elements to it. The good news in this is that by understanding that there are different pathways to thriving, we can begin to customize and be strategic about how we help individual students succeed. I think the negative part of that for me is although it's great to know that one size doesn't fit all, the negative part was that for students of color on predominantly white institutions, they had fewer pathways than students who were in the majority. And I think that gives us pause to say, how can we create more pathways? We also found that their pathways were very different. So while sense of community was important for all, what enhanced a sense of community differed by a student's ethnicity. We found that spirituality was about 3 times as important a contributor to overall thriving among our students of color than it was among our white students. We found that faculty involvement contributed, but it really depended on your ethnicity, and that it was the quality of that faculty involvement that mattered, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. We also found that campus involvement didn't necessarily lead to thriving, that even our most involved students of color were not necessarily thriving as a result of their involvement. And so I think that leads us to start looking a little closer at how we involve students on our campus and what that looks like for the variety of students who are with us. So let's talk first about high-quality faculty interaction. So what we found is that for students, it's when they could have these conversations with faculty, as one of my students ended up doing her dissertation on this, and she asked high-achieving students at a Research One university what really made a difference in the kind of interactions they had with faculty. And these students said, it's when the faculty member could paint this picture of a future for me, could help me see beyond what I had in mind for myself, but showed me the future and what that could look like for me, things I had never thought about before. And having this engaging dialogue about not only these future possibilities, but around current academic issues, being involved in research partnerships. We found in research I've done with Carol Lundberg that unfortunately we found our African American students were interacting the most with faculty, but benefiting the least in terms of their own satisfaction with that interaction and in terms of their reported learning from it. And so I think we have to look and say what's happening in these interactions that students are having with faculty. And as Laura Rendon would say, it's important that we are validating our students' experiences and that every student who walks through the door, we are able to say, you wouldn't be here if I didn't think you could succeed. You deserve to be here. You deserve to be here. You have a place at the table. One of the quotes, we did interviews with about 97 students who were actually high-risk students. Their institutions had labeled them high risk. And yet 2 years into it, so they were all at the end of their sophomore year, they were successful. They had a GPA above 2.5 and were involved on campus and were thriving. And we asked them, what made the difference for you? And one of my favorite quotes was a student who was describing this relationship she had with a faculty member. And she said, well, what made the difference is that she believed in me before I believed in myself. It's that communication from people who represent the university to say, I believe in you. I think you can do this. I see potential in you. And when that gets called out of you, called forth from you, that's what education is all about. It's not about putting into you. It's about calling out from you what is already there and emphasizing the contribution you can make to this place. Now, campus involvement was a moderate predictor of thriving for students who were in the majority culture on their campuses, but was not a significant predictor of thriving in students of color. What we found is that for many of these students, when we started unpacking it and doing focus groups and interviews and so forth, that we found that the students who were not in the majority on campus often said, well, the activities just don't appeal to me. They're not what I'm interested in. Or I go, but nobody's like me. Or what they're doing is not something that really connects with me. And so I think we have to look at how we're planning things on our campuses and the involvement of students in that. And I was speaking at NASPA a couple of weeks ago. And I liked how one woman in the room talked about it as co-creation. She said, when we can co-create our student activities and our organizations on campus with our students, and I think you all do a great job of that here, and I think it becomes a strength of an institution to say it's something that we're doing together. It is not something that is done for or to you. Spirituality was a pathway to thriving in all students, but it was especially an important pathway for our African American and Asian students. And I think this relates to two features of spirituality. One, this sense of meaning and purpose, that there is something bigger than myself. There is something that if we're looking at people as whole persons, that we all have some sense of a spiritual nature, regardless. And this is not religious beliefs. I want to emphasize that. It's not the religious belief a person has, but it is this sense of transcendence, that there's something bigger than me. There's something more to life than just about my little part of the world. But it's also a coping resource. It's also that when life gets difficult, there is this faith component, this spiritual component that can help me cope when things are difficult around me. And so we found that that was triple the contributor to thriving when students were not in the majority on a campus. So if we think about the pathways to thriving for all students, I think there are two primary elements I want to deal with here as we think about how to move forward. One is that for individual students to thrive, I think a strengths development approach can really be the vehicle for that thriving, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then for us to thrive as a community, I think when we unpack what it really means to have a sense of community, what are the components of that it will really lead us into this higher level of thriving collectively and not just individually. So if we think about developing strengths, I think there's two ways to look at that. One is that there are strengths of competence. There are particular talents you have that help you do things well. And so the way the Gallup organization has designed StrengthsFinder, for instance, their philosophy emphasizes this strengths that help you be excellent in your work or academically. So those are strengths of competence. But there are also strengths of character, and so Seligman and Peterson's work at University of Pennsylvania has emphasized these kind of ubiquitous strengths that cross cultures, that all cultures say, this is what it means to be a virtuous person, to live a good life, to be a good person. And it is collectively both of those that I think lead to individual thriving. Because if you only focus on competence without character, you get Enron, okay? Just saying. So we've got to have both things happening. What are the talents we bring that help us be excellent, but also what are the qualities of being a decent human being and treating other people in ways that call out their best? That's when we can thrive collectively as a community. So when we talk about strengths development, it can be seen as starting with this awareness of who am I, this awareness of my strengths, but then it's also who do I want to become? How do I relate to others, and how do we work together? And it is when we are in that kind of cycle of bringing out the best in each other that I think individual and community thriving can happen. It is about the development of strengths. It's not about what are your top 5? What are your 5 themes? Let me put them on the door. It's about what are you doing to develop that? How do you use those to really be excellent at your work, but also excellent in your relationships with other people? So it begins with this talent that you have, this predisposition. When you walk into a room and you see people you don't know, some of you may feel like, oh, look at all the friends I haven't met yet, okay? That's the woo in the room, right? Others of you might say, oh, look at the people kind of standing in the corner or maybe by themselves, feeling bad. Let me reach out to them, the includers. Notice that. Others of us may walk around a room and say, there's my dean, and it looks like she's having a good time. This might be a great time for me to have a conversation about budget. That's the strategic, right? So we all have these talents, this kind of 2-second way of processing information and relating to people, but without the investment of effort, those are not strengths. Those are talents, they're predispositions, they're a way of looking at the world, but it's not a strength until you have invested the time and energy to gain the knowledge and skills to really turn it into something that you can consistently do very, very well. And I think this approach, this strengths development, and I'm going to talk more about it this afternoon, is what encourages this engagement in the learning process and with other people, because it connects to what students already have inside them. It builds on their prior successes, and it says, here's your foundation for how you're going to succeed in college. Let's look at how you've been successful in other areas of your life, even if that's basketball, even if that's singing, whatever your talent is, we can find ways to use your success approaches to being successful in the classroom. So that's individual thriving, an approach that emphasizes what students bring in and the talents they have to offer. But I think when we look at community thriving and individual thriving, the sense of community is the big ticket item. It's the gateway to thriving. So let's talk a little bit about what that is as we bring this to a close. It is the single largest contributor to thriving for every single student group we ever studied. It is number 1 by a landslide. When you feel like you belong, when you feel like you matter, to the people around you, when you feel like you have a contribution to make, you will thrive. And you're not the only one thriving. We're all thriving when you feel that way. So what would a thriving campus look like? I want you to take 30 seconds and think about that. Maybe jot something down. What would it look like for this place to be thriving? Think about it, and then I'm going to ask a couple of you to share. Who are the brave souls? What would a thriving campus look like? This place. When we are thriving, we graduate, okay. What else happens when we are thriving? We're proud, we're supporting one another. Huh? Yeah, there's more discovery that's happening. There's better research that's going to happen. More excitement. Open communication. Yeah, so when there's a crisis, we respond well. Because we're there for each other. Yeah. Sorry? I'm having trouble hearing you. School spirit, absolutely, absolutely. So look at the items that are the best measures of sense of community. I feel like I belong. Being here fills an important need in my life. I feel proud of the university, and there is this strong sense of community on this campus. So let's talk about what that means. Thriving in community, or a sense of community, has these 4 elements to it. Part of it is membership, and in the higher ed literature with Sylvia Hurtado's work, she has focused a lot on sense of belonging. That is only one element of a sense of community. It's an important one, but it's only one of 4. And this comes out of the research in community psychology and the research that we've been doing on thriving as well. So part of it is, do I feel like I belong? And not just that I feel welcome, but that I feel like I am a member. So a student said to me when I asked her, is this a welcoming place? She looked at me and she said, Laurie, I'm in my 3rd year here, and you're asking about welcome? That kind of implies it's your house and I'm the guest. And that was an important moment for me, because I thought, even the word that I thought was a positive word, welcoming, she said, when are you going to see me as part of this house, part of this home? And so it is, how do we communicate to our students that they are a full member of our community here? You can look around and it's Red Friday, right? So the symbols, the signs, the rituals all tell you about the sense of belonging on campus. You can walk across campus, and when you see students wearing a lot of the university clothing, when you go through the parking lot and see bumper stickers that have the university logo, when you are seeing those kinds of things happening, that says students feel like they belong here. When I first went to college, there was a matriculation ceremony, and we all got dressed up for it, and faculty were in full regalia. It was this candlelight ceremony, and it was, we would pass by this large book, and it was, you signed your name that you were now an official member of that college community. And at the time I thought, what's the big deal? But yet I felt like something changed when I signed my name in there. And the really cool thing is that I could look back in the pages, and my father's name was in that book, and my grandfather's name was in that book. So there was that legacy, that tradition, that ritual. But that's only part of it. There's also ownership, and that is, what are we doing so that students have a voice? You see, you don't feel a sense of community if you feel like nobody's listening to you. So you have to feel like you have some input, that you have a contribution to make, and that matters, that you are heard. And when that happens, then all of us agree, because we care so much about being part of the community, we will conform to the norms. And so that actually how we respond in crisis changes, how we handle disciplinary situations. Actually, there are fewer disciplinary problems because we are wanting to be in community with one another. Relationship is kind of the emotional connection. Are we celebrating together? When bad things happen, are we there for each other with social support? But when good things happen, are we also celebrating, and is there opportunity for these positive interactions? And that doesn't have to be across the whole campus. You can have subgroups of relationship that will strengthen this. And then partnership is the fourth piece of this. And this is this ability to work together to accomplish things that we couldn't accomplish alone. This interdependence, these shared goals, this synergy that is created when we work together. That's a sense of community, and it is the gateway to thriving. And the cool thing about sense of community is it doesn't cost a dime. It doesn't cost a dime. It really requires us to simply shift how we are in relationship to each other and how we see our work together. So where do we go from here? Well, I think we begin by recognizing student success is more than grades and grads. I think we can monitor the thriving levels of our students, especially during transition times and especially in populations who may not be in the majority on campus. Populations that we may perceive as having more hurdles to overcome in order to be successful. We should be monitoring their levels, not just their GPA, not just if they're going to class or not, but are they thriving with us? And we need to direct them into the resources and pathways that are going to allow them to reach their goals and capitalize on their strengths. We have got to do it together. It cannot be one side of the house or the other. It has got to be a partnership of faculty and student affairs professionals. It absolutely takes a village to graduate a student. It is not something that we can do in our own silos. And when we focus on building a sense of community across campus, the kind of community that values the strengths that every person brings, then that creates the foundation for thriving. So here's my vision in closing. And, at this point in my life, I feel like, I'm probably one of those midlife adults who's looking back and going, okay, what has my own life been worth? And if I've got a few years left in me, what's really important to me? Here's what's important to me. Here's where I have invested my life, and I want to continue investing my life. I want every single student who enters college to learn to develop the strengths that they already have within them and how to apply them to the challenges that they are likely to face in college. I want every student who's with us to become engaged in learning, engaged in it, with faculty who encourage that deep learning, not memorization, not regurgitation for the test, the deep learning that changes their lives. And I want them connected with faculty, not just in the classroom, but outside of class as well. I want every student who's with us to connect with an advisor who can help them see the potential, to see the possibilities, to envision the kind of future and what they have to offer the world. And I want every student to be part of a community where they can feel valued and supported and that is likely to bring out their best. And I think when that happens, not only will our students thrive, but so will we. We will thrive as well when our students are thriving. If you want more information, there is a website for you. I also have reference slides for you, but I thank you very much for the opportunity to share a little bit of my vision with you this morning.